Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you guys for coming out today. Should be a good, fun evening. It's nice that some of the plants have started percolating back up. Not a whole lot of them. It's still a little colder than I kind of expected. The Ozarks do what they want. But we do have a couple volunteers starting to show up. I have plant presses from last year because they aren't really big enough to really show them. So we'll be able to look at some of them the best that we can manage. Hopefully next month I try to have live plants to show. Sometimes I manage it, sometimes I don't. You can call me out, feel free. I'll remember you. But, so by way of introduction, my name is Dr. Taylor Goodwin. I am a naturopathic doctor. Sounds kind of like natural path. It kind of represents what I do. So I went to medical school. That part happened. I did learn pharmaceuticals. I did learn all of the standard diseases, anatomy, physiology, you know, everything from pediatrics up to geriatrics and everything in between. But I kind of took a little bit of a side tack that stayed that way, and I didn't come back. And I specialized in alternative medicine. So that kind of goes into the route of rebuilding the body and helping it heal itself. Now, there are some things, there's benefits on both sides, but some of those tools that I found really played into some of my nerdiness as a kid. Because when I was a kid, I got a book from my mom, and it was called something like, what was it? Fascinating Herbals Across the Ages, or something like that, from Reader's Digest. Definitely the most plant-oriented company ever. But I was going through there, and I just read about how yarrow, its Latin name is Achillea millefolium, and Achillea is named after Achilles, the Greek hero. And so I was all these stories just fired in my mind. And then I started having different comments from my mother than please clean your room. It was, please come back to our lawn. Please stop picking the neighbor's weeds. And from there, I kind of ended up, once I was in med school, I kind of took off down that way. Lots of tools that we learned about in alternative medicine are really cool. Diet, lifestyle, nutrition, all of that. Hydrotherapy, acupuncture. But my favorite one was there, and it was herbs. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be able to share some of that nerdiness. There's a lot of really good ones that grow out here. Just wild. So, to start off with, I'm going to tell you two stories next to each other as kind of a way to get you primed. And then we'll dive into what we have here. So, and most of the way that I'll teach today is probably going to be through stories, but every now and then I chase squirrels, so just expect whatever happens, I guess. But there was a family during the Depression era, 1920s, and the dad had lost his job, and they had no way to provide. He had no way to provide for the family anymore, and so it got to the point where it's like there's nothing in town. I tried everything. He had to leave and travel to just try and find something anywhere, and that left his wife and their 4 kids at home while he's doing that. This wasn't a good solution. It was the only solution. And after a period of time, as I understand it, not that long, all the food in the house was gone. And there was nothing left except for a small handful of pinto beans and 1 egg. And no one would eat it because they didn't want to be the one who ate the last meal and take it from everyone else. So when this happened, one of the teenage boys was like, all right, I have a secret nerdy hobby, and I'm going to go ahead and make use of it. And he headed out along the mountainsides and the valleys, and he harvested, and he came back with a bag partway full of prickly pear fruit, puffball mushrooms, and a bunch of edible greens. And he gave it to his family, and they were actually able to, almost entirely just from his foraging, for 1 entire month, that's what they lived on. I tell this story because, number one, it's cool. His name was Ewell Gibbons, if anyone's familiar with him. So, he's the, have you ever eaten a pine tree? That guy.
Great nuts.
Great nuts, yep. And then he got a plaque from Sonny and Cher, and he took a bite of it because it was wood, but it was actually made of plaster. Anyway, fun guy. The moral, I guess, of this is, number one, plants are cool, you can eat them. Number two, he was a teenage boy. He was a teenage kid, and he was able to go out there and harvest safely and actually get benefit from it. Backstory on him, he went to the libraries and read the books on wild edibles. He also went to all the different towns, and he would talk to people, and they would tell him whatever they would tell him. And then he would go, all right, that's really cool. Who would you say is the expert in town? And then he would actually go learn from them. Or people who would eat it in front of him, and he'd come back and check the next day. If you're not dead, that's a good sign, you know? I don't know if that was his exact method, but he did find the experts in town. That's actually Dean Jordan's method in Florida. If someone tells him something's edible and he has no source, it's like, I'll watch you eat it and I'll come back tomorrow and bury you if it didn't work out. But, great guy. So, second story, counterpoint. There was a state park ranger. The guys who go through all the state parks, take care of it, take care of the animals, make sure that people aren't doing crazy, stupid things, take care of people. And, you know, he's familiar with plants, he's been among them. He probably can identify several trees. It's not really his shtick, but he probably has some familiarity. But he sits down for lunch one day, and he pulls out a sandwich, and I imagine that it must have just been meat bread, because he decided it was a really boring sandwich. And he leaned over and he grabbed a ferny leaf, and he put it on the sandwich. Very pretty leaf, actually. We have one of them right back over there. The ferny leaf looks kind of like a carrot leaf, more divided. If you break it, you probably didn't smell it, or else you probably wouldn't put it on a sandwich. It smells a little rancid, actually. And he went ahead and he put it on a sandwich, and he ate the sandwich, and unfortunately, that was the last sandwich. He did not survive. That was poison hemlock. So these two stories, can you be safe? Even a kid can be safe. Can you be unsafe? If you are overconfident or cocky or think that, oh, all plants are healthy and good, you can get into trouble. It's kind of like driving a car. It can be very safe, you know, overall, if you follow the rules. As soon as you stop following the rules, all bets are off. So, those two next to each other, just remember 3 tips. Tip number 1, try to have more than one source. Remember what Ewell Gibbons did. He learned at the library, he learned from experts, and then he went out and did it. Rule number 2, if you're taking medications or you have special health conditions, probably talk to your doctor, make sure nothing funny is going to happen. Plants are actually the source of around, numbers vary, depend on who you trust, but 70 to 90% pharmaceuticals. Makes sense that when they're hyper-concentrated and lots of things are taken out and added, but that plants would interact with that, right? So that's a safety thing. Third tip is not for you, it's for the plants. And this is in the top right corner of the handout over there. When harvesting, try not to harvest rare or endangered plants. And by try, I mean don't. And then if they're common plants, try to only harvest up to 1/3 or half. And don't take the roots if you don't need them. And then that'll make so that they stay around. There actually have been plants that have gone extinct in areas because people over-harvested them. So your 1 or 2 or 12 or whatever actually count, because there are other people who are excited about this too. So if you see that some harvesting has happened, just don't do that patch. Someone else has already done it. If you do see that no one's done it, go ahead and only take that much, and you have hopefully seen other patches, so you know that this isn't the only one. A few plants that I won't harvest any of include Echinacea until I verify that it's off the list, and I keep meaning to check that. Echinacea, even though you see stands of it, in some places that's endangered, or at least on the cusp of it. Number 2, golden seal. There are a few others, but you get the idea. So, those are kind of the 3 safety things. Exciting, that's what you were here for, so now you can go. But if you stay, we'll go ahead and go into a couple plants. So, we have 2 plants here today because it's pretty early in the season and I want you to get the ones that are going to come up first. And I also didn't have a whole lot of samples to draw from because it's still cold out there. I probably should have started in March, but you know, excited, so. Anybody want to take a shot at what this is? And I don't need to worry about you being able to read my handwriting, so this will go away. You've probably seen this one in like every single front yard. What was that?
I'm going to guess it's plantain.
Plantain.
Oh.
This is plantain. Gold star. All right. Yes, both of these plants that we're going to talk about grow in the Ozarks. Both of these are very plentiful when they're in season. So plantain, also called Plantago major. There are other species, Plantago lanceolata, and a few others. We'll talk about major and lanceolata today. awesome stories. A few things that it's really good at. So here are the stories about plantain. One day, up on the homestead, up in Little Kansas, my nephew went out to do some field work. You know, whatever it is to keep everything together. I don't remember what he was assigned that day. Probably putting up a fence or repairing a fence or getting after the dog for biting and digging under the fence. That's every day. So he was out there and he did his work. Something happened that I didn't hear about. And then the next day he came and said, hey, from yesterday when I was doing that work, I got a sting from a wasp right here. I think it was lower. I think it was right about here. And it was big and it was red and it was angry and it wasn't happy. And he's like, can you do anything with this? Because you're like the weird doctor, right? The weird kind? And I'm like, yes, I'm the weird doctor. I can do something weird about that. And so the first thing that came to my mind was plantain. I went and I looked around and I looked for, the easiest way to find plantain is not to look for the leaves, which you'd think that's what you're going to see. That's the bigger part of it. If you're trying to find it in a field, look for the little seed head. That will stand out against the field a lot easier. Even if you know what the plant looks like backwards, forwards, and sideways. That'll make it easier. Look for the brown seed head. And there might be multiple coming up from one plant. But I looked, and I found that, and then I found the plant, and I noticed all the leaves coming out of a single point in the ground, not off of a stalk. They're coming from the ground, not off a stem. So the leaves come out in a spiral around that plant. And they're all at ground level. That has a special name. It's called a basal, meaning baseline, rosette, meaning spiral of things coming off of the center. This is a basal rosette pattern of growth. Other plants have basal rosettes. They might have different shaped leaves and other things. But seeing that pattern, that's the first thing to identify this. So I found it, I did the other identification steps that we'll get to, and then I pulled the leaf, and then I cleaned it off in the hope no one's looking, this isn't for one of my patients method, and I popped it in my mouth and I chewed it up, and I spit it out, and then also looking around, making sure this isn't with any of my patients. I'm much more hygienic in the clinic. I slapped it on there. He's my nephew, those are fine. And then I took a Band-Aid out of my wallet, and I went ahead and I slapped it on there and kept it there. Around an hour later, swelling had gone down. Redness had dimmed. It still hurt, but less. And the swelling was still somewhat present. It didn't miraculously get rid of it entirely, but it definitely improved it. Part 2 of this story, and this is where we find out that Uncle Goodwin is not that clever. I went out with a different nephew to go and do stuff in the fields. I went right next to the same place that nephew 1 was. And I was like, let's do stuff outside. I don't know if we were having fun, I don't know what we were doing, but we weren't having fun by the end because the wasp nest was still there. And if you go right near the wasp nest, what happens? You get stung. You should have been there that day. You could have helped. Basic logic was not my strong point, but we both got stung, not just one of us. The difference this time was I got the plantain on the first day, right after getting stung. It never got that big, it never got that painful. Why? So, plantain, besides, that's cool, it helps wasp stings. But why? Plantain has a compound in it called tannins, or tannic acid. There are various kinds, but we'll spare you from going into details that aren't really necessary. Also, I haven't memorized the 27 different kinds of tannins, so don't ask that question, we'll pretend I know. But, tannins, if any of you like dry wines, I haven't had those because I don't drink alcohol, but I'll pretend I know. If you drink a dry wine, it dries your mouth out, presumably. That's the tannins. They bind up the mucus lining in the mouth that makes it feel like it's hydrated. They also bind up the fluid and draw it away. They also bind up some of the proteins in there. And so this is something that actually helps it fight off bad things, whether it's a bacteria or toxins or anything like that. It binds. It won't take up everything. It's not a perfect detox, but it certainly helps. It also tightens tissue, and it draws things towards it. So if you put something with tannins over a wasp sting, drawing poultice. you are pulling out some of the venom. You're also tightening the tissue, which kind of wrings it out like a sponge and makes the swelling go down. Swelling going down is critical for making pain go down. Swelling builds a pressure that's quite painful. And most of it's actually, not most, but lots, is actually coming from the pressure of the fluid. It's not just from the injury. So this is a really good one. So you can write down that plantain is astringent. That's what that action is called. And that's what it looks like when you're using it properly. One of the ways. There's lots of ways you can use astringency. All right, second story for plantain. This one's one of my favorite stories. It's fun. There was a guy, and still is, this isn't like the park ranger, thankfully, a good example of what not to do, yeah. There was a guy in Idaho, which is a lot colder than here, but in Idaho, it's a lot less densely populated. How do I put that? There's the city, and then there's the nothing, and there's lots of nothing. Coming out here, I was confused. I kept waiting like, okay, we left Tulsa, that means there's nothing. Oh, no, house. Okay, now we're out of Tulsa, house. Now we're out of the house. Now we're out of Little Kansas, house. And it's like, everything's just kind of hidden so that you don't have neighbors except for if you want them. I don't know. But
It's rural Oklahoma.
yeah. So in Idaho, it's actually possible to get out on your own. And they hiked, their family, Patrick's family, Dr. Patrick Jones, he's a veterinarian as well as an herbalist, and he hiked about 3 days into the true wilderness with another family of friends. And they all went out there, they set up their camp, they were having a good time, they had their dogs out there playing with their kids, and then they hear, "Boo!" One of the dogs got injured. Someone looked over fast enough that they saw a rattlesnake tail whisk off into the tall grass. It was summer, and the rattlers were out. The dog had been bit on his forepaw, if I remember right, actually I think it might have been his muzzle. Anyway, wherever he was bit and it was injected and it didn't look nice. It had the yes, venom has been injected here kind of look. So Dr. Patrick Jones can't get this dog back to his clinic. He can't get it to the places where you get antivenoms, which as far as I understand, he doesn't stock antivenoms. That's not a veterinarian thing. You have them at probably the hospital. So he had to do what he could with what he had. And he fell back from veterinarian to herbalist, because that was around him. He pulled out some things from his emergency kit, echinacea root, which is not what most people expect, but then from the surroundings, a key ingredient that he needed, plantain. And he had, okay, this is what it looks like. Kids, go get a whole bunch. We need to do this. They brought it all together. They made a poultice. I think there was one other ingredient. And they put it on the outside, and they bound it there. And then he worked his veterinarian magic, and this is where I'd be useless. And he got the dog to eat this somehow. It's like, good job. Maybe you had bacon grease left over from dinner. I don't know. I might work on humans. But they got the dog to eat some. That was all they could do. And by next morning, the dog should have been a lot worse off. And actually, it wasn't feeling fantastic, but it was alive, which is better than expected. And it was able to move around. And then it went on and it lived a normal life after it had the time of recovery. Why? Plantain's so cool. I love this plant so much. It does so many things, and it's so common, and it's on every continent besides Antarctica. So wherever you go, you have a first aid kit. The reason why, let's talk a little bit about what venom has in it. So the action that you can write down is anti-venom, with a little asterisk that says, please still go to the hospital. Dr. Goodwin is not responsible for your adventuresome spirit, but please do tell me how it went. So really do go to the hospital. Not every venom has the same compounds, which is a very important thing. Plantain doesn't work against all of them, but there are 3 compounds that are common in snake and spider venom. This is really good for a spider that's like, oh, it's just an obnoxious spider bite, not a deadly one. Like you can identify it and you know it was just a house spider of some kind that got you obnoxiously. 3 compounds. Compound number 1, you guys have probably heard of collagen, right? Helps give our skin that lovely luster and that youthful glow. As you can tell. Now, collagen is what makes everything kind of grow and have, it's the scaffolding that everything else is built off of as well, our collagen threads. And so it also helps with the basement membrane that the skin cells rest on and holds things in place, a whole bunch of stuff. Snake and spider venoms very often have collagen ACE. Collagenase. ACE is a little scientific suffix that means enzyme, cutter-upper. It means cutter-upper. So collagen, cutter-upper, collagenase. So if you get injected, it starts cutting up all your collagen. Not good. We just said how that's all over the place. Not good. Second thing in snake venoms, and many venoms I should say, in our skin, we have something that makes it do this. Snap back to shape. It's elastic. The stuff is called elastin. That's what the stuff inside there is. Guess what venoms have? Elastase. Aha! All right, elastase. And the third thing, hyaluronic acid is kind of the mortar that goes in between the bricks to hold all of this together. Hyaluronic acid is something that's really nice, again, for plump, healthy skin. Hyaluronidase is what's in the venoms. So, plantain has anti-hyaluronidase, anti-collagenase, and anti-elastase. So it takes out all of the scissors, takes out all of the cutter-uppers, and it stops them in their tracks. If you leave those to continue and do their work, your skin sloughs off, and that's not good. But if you stop all of those early in the process, then it preserves all of that action. There might be some other things in the venom that makes so that it's very irritated still. It's not going to make so it's a pleasant experience. But all three of those are countered by Plantago. And that's fantastic. So they have anti-venom as one of its actions. Other things that plantain does, the last one that I'll tell you, this is a little short for a story, but I have something called reactive arthritis. It's called not fun disease. Arthritis of any kind means that your joints are painful and probably getting damaged in some way. Usually there's inflammation involved. Not all arthritises have inflammation, like osteoarthritis is just mechanical damage, but so reactive arthritis is the joints having issues and inflammation. Joints are connective tissue. Plantago helps rebuild connective tissue. I find that if I've been eating things that I shouldn't, because that's what really flares up my stuff, if I'm eating things that I shouldn't, all my tendons get swollen. Just a little. You can't really tell on the outside. It's not like, oh, that's definitely a tendon, but when you go like this and it feels like your joint is loose, trust me, that's what it feels like, and it's like, oh dang it, it's swollen, and then it's got pain right along the tendon line, and if you know anatomy, you can trace it. And then that makes the joints so that they're not, they're not like this, they're kind of like this, and they get sloppy, and that hurts. Well, we already talked about astringency takes the swelling out. Really helps with some joint things, especially if they're inflammatory. The other thing, however, is that plantain is a connective tissue rebuilder, or tonic. And so the joint damage can be helped lightly to rebuild. And so those two things together, I really like using plantain to go ahead and take some of the edge off. There are other things I use to make the immune system stop going crazy. Those are different plants, different day. But plantain is definitely one that's in my toolkit.
You do a tea with it? Or just
I eat it as a hot herb. The question was, do I make a tea with it? I actually just eat the leaves whole, or I put them on a salad. Warning, I have an herbalist's tongue. This is going to taste bitter to most people. Smaller leaves, much more palatable. Actually, back in Europe, it was called a pot herb, as I just mentioned. They would throw it into their food all the time. This is not native to our continent. It was brought over by the European settlers, and actually it got its name because the Native Americans watched the Europeans go by, and then a couple weeks go by, and they'd see a trail of plantain. And so they named it White Man's Footprint, because everywhere the white man went, his faithful plant followed. One plant can make 20,000 static electricity loving seeds. And so they just kind of scatter everywhere. Not endangered. You can enjoy this one. Especially since you don't need the roots, just go for the leaves. There's some other fun stuff, like plantago actually means bottom of the foot, and that's white man's footprint. That's how I got that. Plantar surface is the bottom of your foot. Major means big leaf. Lanceolata means lance-shaped, long, narrow leaf. Let's go into identification, actually. So here are the lanceolata leaves, are the ones that are actually attached to the plant. And then here's Dr. Goodwin's laziness. I didn't press the leaf before it dehydrated and shrunk like crazy. This is supposed to be a big, big fat leaf, okay? It's probably like 2 or 3 times that size. That's a plantago major leaf. So, on the leaves, you might notice there are veins, and they run parallel. I'll have it up here for the back row to come take a closer look after if you like. They run parallel. They don't have this webby kind of vein thing going on. They all run in the same direction. And those veins all come down and they run up the leaf stalk. They don't stop at the base of the leaf, they actually continue into the leaf stalk. That is important for identification. If you take one of these leaves and you turn it over on the backside and you run your finger horizontal, it feels like a washboard, thump, thump, thump. Because the backside of those leaves, those veins are so thick, you'll feel them. If you don't feel them, it's probably not plantain. So this is important.
On the back.
On the back in particular. They protrude on the back and they
feel them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And the older they get, the more you'll feel them. If they're very young, you probably should wait for them to grow more because there are some lookalikes when they're very young. And we'll hit that at the end. Tell me if I forget. But to continue with the leaf, at the leaf stalk portion, it looks like celery. It's bent into a U, just like celery is. And if you tear that leaf stalk, those fibers are still there and it'll go snick, snick, snick. If you tear the leaf, it'll also go snick, snick, snick on those fibers. They're really tough. So look for the U-shaped leaf stalk with parallel fibers you can feel on the back of the leaf. And all the leaves come from a central point in the ground, none off of a stem. And if you do that, the last identification thing is the one part of the plant we haven't talked about yet. These seeds. The seed head, wait till the seed head comes up and you'll be safe. If there's no seed head, if you know what you're doing and you're really familiar with the plant, you can tell if it's plantain or not. But when you're starting out, it's all those little things that are hard to describe. You just kind of know. It's like, what does, Aunt Petunia look like versus what do 2 people look like versus each other, but they're sisters, and you try to describe it, and it's like, I think one of them has an eyebrow that's a little longer, maybe? I don't know. Don't ask me to be the police lineup guy. That's what it's like with plants. Once you get to a certain point, unless you want to use really nitty-gritty language, like it's a cruciate mint, cruciate squared off stem. But point is, look for these flowering stalks. Nothing else has these. There can be multiple from a single plant, and these flowering stalks, once they turn from the little teeny green flowers, they don't look like flowers, but they are technically flowers, into these brown seeds. These seeds have a lovely action that you should take with you to every party. It will make you so popular. Everyone's favorite party action is laxative. Perfect. So, if they serve that food, you're going to be constipated. You have the solution. So, this is actually virtually identical to Metamucil. This is psyllium husk. So, you can go ahead and take a half a tablespoon of that. The one mistake some people make is they don't drink enough water with it. Don't make that mistake, because then it will give you what you're trying to solve. So you need lots of water to go with it. But that is an extremely useful plant with several different offerings. Very safe for pregnant, safe for all uses. It's a vegetable-like herb. With laxatives, obviously try not to give kids laxatives and stuff like that for reasons that you don't do that with anything. And if you do that, do it in the doctor's direction. There we go. So, that is plantain. One of my very favorite plants. There are a few other stories, but if I keep doing this, then we won't have time for our second star. So, and our second star has two names. I'm going to take time to share a story that I find amusing, so forgive me. My wife and I, we arrived in Colorado, and I think actually we just moved from one part of the state to another, actually, but still. Arrived in a new neighborhood. It was not a desert wasteland this time, which was novel for us. And I went on a walk to acquaint myself with all the greenery that I had missed, because I had had cactuses in our previous place, and that was it. Cacti are lovely, and I found a plant tenaciously growing between the sidewalk cracks in this pretty city-ish kind of area, not downtown, but still. And it had these gorgeous purple flowers that were just teeny tiny. And I went up, and I saw there was a bunch of it, and I went ahead and I picked it, and I brought it home as a welcome to our new home flower for my wife. You may now applaud at my husband's shape. So, thank you. So I gave it to my wife, and then she said, "Oh, thank you. We're going to have such a good life here." And then she said, "What's it called?" And this is the part where I pause the story. And I'm like, "Oh, well," or I pause, "I need to take the garbage out. Give me, a couple hours." And so then I go and rifle through my herbal books really, really fast. And then the next day, because it wasn't really fast, I'm like, "Oh, you asked me a question before I bolted off for no reason the other day." I totally know what that is, because I know plants very, very well. I'm quite accomplished in plants, yes. It's called, and then I remembered the other rule of romance. You give the flower, but you never call it by its Latin name. Remember that. It's important. So I didn't use the Latin name of Lamium amplexicale. Instead, I proudly, and I felt so good I was doing it. It's called Hendit. And she looked down at the flower, and I was like, "What's she thinking? What's happening inside of her head?" And then she looked up, and she was like, "Why do all the prettiest flowers have the ugliest names?" And I'm like, "Ah!" So I started a new movement where I call it Tyrian Star. Tyrian is a type of purple that was used for royalty, and the reason I tell this story, besides that it assuages my wounded soul, is because if you remember the shockingly deep and bright purple, and it looks even deeper than it does in this picture, when it is down in the little plants, especially when the flowers are still budding, they are a deep, rich, royal purple that you can see all the way from the road, even though they are only the size, each flower, of a pinhead. Very, very deep purple. And so I started calling it Tyrian Star, because Tyrian purple was the royal purple that was lost for like 1,000 years, and we finally discovered how to make it again. Everyone's very excited about that. Who's a nerd? So, but the true Latin name is Lamium amplexicale. Where does that come from? Well, lamium could come from two places. People kind of disagree. Some people think it's both. The word lamina, and I'm telling you this so you can remember how to identify it. So there's a purpose besides nerdiness. Although I always start from the nerdiness. You won't get away from it. Welcome. But lamia, so a very similar word that has the same root is lamina. And a lamina means a plate. If you know how to identify spinal column stuff, we call things lamina because they're plate-like. We use that in Latin all the time if you have any of that. And so, on this plant, take a look at that. Take a look at that leaf that is now slid a third down the page. Looks like a plate with the stem stuck through it. It's actually two leaves, and they are just half circles, and they have no leaf stalk whatsoever, and they're just clasped right up to the stem. That's theory one on where lamium in Lamium amplexicale comes from. Theory two is a little less helpful, but I'll tell you anyway. So, how many of you have heard of the Medusa, the monster in Greek mythology? Yeah? Okay. Points. How many of you have heard of the Harpy, also from Greek mythology? Oh, we're doing pretty good. All right. This is the tough one. How many of you have heard of the Lamia? No one. It's a lesser-known Greek monster. It's a half-snake, half-woman, man-eating monster. That's what she did. She went around as a snake and ate men. So, ladies, if you happen to have husbands or brothers or sons or nephews, please, when they are around this plant, watch them closely for their own good. They could disappear in a moment. So, some people, the reason they think that this might be why is because if you look at these flowers, and I'm sorry, I'm going to ruin the cuteness of the flower forever for you. I inflict my own pain upon ye. It looks like little mouth. Looks like little mouth coming up on a tube. If you're familiar with the mint flower, like any mint, it has those little mouths looking like flowers. This is a mint. So, ye have been warned, there be monsters here. So that's Lamia of Lamia amplexicale. Amplexicale is a little more straightforward, even though the Latin's obnoxiously obscure, which is the best kind. The amplexicale just means close clasping, fully encircling leaves. We kind of covered that with the plate. So they kind of said it looks like a plate, but really it looks like a plate. There we go. Okay, good name. Now, this is an edible plant. It's quite common in spring. You've driven by it, you've seen it, you may or may not have been able to identify it, etc. But you've seen it if you've been around here. Quite plentiful. It's also plentiful in Japan. And actually 1,000 years ago and more, there was a handmaiden in the royal Japanese palace. And she wrote a book called The Pillow Book. And it has a whole bunch of things, because I assume that she worked with things, and the pillow is like she had to take care of the room of her mistress's stuff. I don't remember all of the details, because I never knew them. So, but she included in this book a traditional recipe that was traditional even then. So it goes back who knows how much earlier. And that recipe is still used today in Japan. And it's called the 7 Herbs of Spring. And every January 7th, the Japanese, it's a tradition, obviously not everyone does it, but traditionally you have a rice porridge with these 7 herbs mixed in to give you health, vitality, resilience, and good fortune for the year to come. And one of those 7 herbs, pretty obvious at this point, is henbit or Tyrian star or Lamia amplexicale. Really shoehorning the Tyrian star in there. And this was included in the recipe 1,000 years ago. Why? Why would it be included? 2 reasons. One, the recipe actually changed from region to region based on whatever grew in spring. And this is one of the ones that was plentiful, safe, easy to identify, but it also has some good uses. So let's touch on those next. Funny thing is, the best use for it, it's not very good at it. Which sounds like, wait, the best use it's not good at. Unfortunately, that's true. Its best use is as a digestive. Kind of like a lot of greens. If you eat a lot of heavy stuff, it's kind of like, I guess I should have eaten some plants before that because that makes the digestion work better, and I'm not sure why. It's because they're bitter, and it makes your gallbladder move. Okay. But this one does that too, and it helps with digestion. But it's not like super at it. But it also helps, I wouldn't prescribe it for this, but it also helps with joints. And it's not super at this other thing, but it also helps with parasites. And it's not super with this other thing, but it also helps with inflammation. It also helps with oxidative damage. It also helps with swelling. It also helps with a frick ton of things. And it's just this gentle, across-the-board health tonic that's mildly helpful across a ton of things. And that is probably why it's included in the 7 Herbs of Spring, to give you that vitality and a good starting place to go from for the rest of the year. You can actually still find kits if you go to the right Asian market corner that have the 7 Herbs of Spring in them. I have no idea how they're treated, like if they still have their herbal vitality in them or not, but it's still something that goes on. Very fascinating. So, let's cover the rest of how to identify this little friend. And before I forget, I will say, this one tastes a lot better than that one. So this one's also nice that way. The texture is just a little bit thick, like the fluid in there is a little bit thicker, so just be ready for that, but it's not like it's gonna have strings coming off of it because it's such a thick fluid, just, it's a little bit viscous. But it has a very mild flavor, maybe just a touch of mint. It's actually one of the least minty mints, but there's still just a touch. The way that you can go ahead and identify it is you look for those plates, but then the stem, you'll notice in between the plates, it's bare stem. There's not anything else going on there. And if you take that stem, you roll it between your fingers, it will go bada-bada-bump, 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 because it's a square. Yep, you guys got it. It is a square stem, and that will help you.
Are the flowers edible?
The flowers are also edible, yes. Everything above ground. The stems are going to be really stringy, so eat them if you don't care, but they're not dangerous. The leaves on their edges, oh good, you can tell. Sometimes on presses, this kind of level of detail gets disappeared. They have this kind of rounded arch ending, scalloped edges. Yes, that's the technical term. Scalloped edges. Look for scalloped edges. The leaf shape is what's going to tell you apart from its look-alike. Scalloped edges and leaves clasping to this square stem. And then they come in plates with bare stem between. The look-alike is purple dead nettle. Does that sound like a plant that you want to eat? Actually, you can! Unlike poison hemlock, which does what it sounds like, purple dead nettle, the word dead actually is because there's little hairs on it, and they're like, oh, those are stingers. Oh, they're dead stingers. They don't do anything. And so they don't have any sting in them, so they called it dead nettle. The nettle part is dead, but it's actually safe. I haven't eaten that one. I've researched it. It seems safe. This is your reminder. Have more than one source. And I'm going to say again, I haven't eaten purple dead nettle, but I'm going to tell you how to identify it to tell it apart from this one, which I have eaten many times. They grow in the same place. And again, yeah, I've seen it while I've harvested this one, and I'm still being cautious and not just saying, close enough. Do your homework. But purple dead nettle has leaf stalks and then little triangle leaves. Everything else is pretty much the same. Yay tall, purple flowers. I think it has, yeah, it does have a square stem, and the leaves come off at the same level, at least the leaf stalks, petioles, technical term. So it's opposite in its leafing structure, meaning the leaves come off at the same level. This would be alternate, by the way, alternate leafing structure, opposite leafing structure. Both of these have opposite leafing structures, but leaf stalk means dead nettle with a triangle leaf at the end. The rest of it's very simple. So hopefully that makes sense. There's some things you can look at up here and, to give you a bit more. And I also have the recipe, or one of the several recipes of the 7 herbs of spring for you right here. There's also my little blurb that I totally didn't need to include in this about Tyrian Star being a much better name than Hendon. So you can treasure that and help me start a movement. Those 2 plants are kind of what I've got for today. Both of them should be coming up soon. They both grow in meadows. Plantain likes just a touch of shade. I've noticed that it shows up there more often, but if it's more than a touch of shade, it starts to get this white fuzz, white mildew. Don't use that, obviously. Please don't eat mold, unless it's cheese. Okay, well. So, yeah, both of these should be coming up soon. So, fun stuff. Those are the plants I've got for you. I do have a few fun events to tell you about that are coming up. Next month, I will be back and doing this again. Hopefully you'll come and join me. We'll have new plants, not just a repeat. And hopefully we'll have plants that are actually out of the ground. That would be nice. We'll see. The thing is, it's not going to be the first Wednesday, like this one was. We've changed schedule, and it's going to be the 4th Wednesday of the month. Whatever that lands on, this is monthly until you hear otherwise. If you sign up for my newsletter, you'll hear otherwise, or the library, they tell you, just look But next month for sure, and hopefully every month all the way through October, I have a few things where I'm doing stuff north of Tulsa, and it's like sometimes, blah, blah, blah. You don't need to know that right now. It's every month right now. So, and it starts at 6:30. And we'll go over plants. Other event. If any of you want to be even nerdier, which is a good thing, I have the Foundations of Home Herbalism class. What might be, I'm not sure if it's the last cohort I'll run in the area or not, but it's starting in March and it runs 8 months, but it's only 1 day a month for 2 hours. We go over herbal safety, but herbal research, how to do proper research so you know you're getting good information. What's a good source? How many sources? How do you know that the medicinal value in your forager book is that on spot on or not? All these other things. How do you do a check for medication, and at what point are you out of your depth? We do all that. We talk about several different herbs and their uses. We talk about medicine making. We talk about a whole bunch of other stuff. If you're interested in more details, ask me or email me. There's a card somewhere. There's a card on that table over there that has my phone number and my email. Feel free to do that. There's also an herbal class QR code if you just want to shoot it and do it that way. So that is starting in March, on March 15th. There's a discount if you sign up before March 1st. Let's see.
Where are you taking us out into the field, though?
It comes with 3 plant walk passes.
Yeah.
And so when I do plant walks, you are invited to come if it works for your schedule. It's not technically part of the class, but they come with the class, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly we focus on how to think like an herbalist, how to formulate and actually have a self-synergized remedy. And we do formulation practice. And I'm focusing on the once you're in the kitchen aspects. But we do some identification, and we do have those plant walk passes as plant walks happen that come with it. Awesome question.
Are you still going to do the Eat the Ozarks one? I forgot what you called it, the Eat the Ozarks class? Or?
There was one where you could, so I don't remember naming one Eat the Ozarks, but there are a couple things that come to mind.
It's a good name.
Yeah, it's like, okay, yes, we are doing that now. There was one where I set up and we had all of these different plants that you could come and taste and teas that we made. That one was kind of a special session. We'll see if the library invites that to happen again this year. And then there was one where we did a plant walk and yeah, I'm gonna have to talk with you about which one.
I think it was in your newsletter.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's in yours. I think we call it Meet the Ozarks.
I have a question. When is the next plant walk?
The next plant walk is pending when plants come up, probably March or April.
Yes.
So, as for the Meet the Ozarks, I might need to talk to the person who helps me with my herbal newsletter and be like, so tell me what my schedule is, please. But I'm sure if it's on the newsletter, it's happening, and I'm just blanking right now. I do that. So you've seen how many squirrels I chase. Whatever was back at the house is still there. So I'm off in the woods with a squirrel. But yeah. Any other events? Probably that one. And yeah, I think that's about what we've got. Any questions about these plants or what we talked about for the events? All right, then I'll go ahead and close up. And if you want to talk to me about stuff after, that's great. But thank you guys very much for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and turn off the recording.